Hello and welcome to another podcast episode. This week we've got a special guest joining us from Hartlepool United, who obviously we're playing on Saturday in our latest league fixture. So we're going to get a bit of a preview on that game, hear about what's going on at Hartlepool, what's been going on there previously in the season, which will be very interesting to Woking fans, obviously with ex-managers and stuff like that. So I'm delighted to be joined by Robbie Stelling. Robbie, thank you for joining us. Did you want to just give a quick intro into yourself and how long you've supported and covered the club?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for having me, Jacob. And it's very nice to hear another Southern accent, I have to say. I'm up here in the Northeast, just about 5 minutes from Hartlepool's home ground. And so it's always good to hear a fellow Southerner. So I've been a Hartlepool fan all my life. I'm lucky enough now to cover the team through my work for the Hartlepool Mail, which is the local newspaper. So we get really great access to the club, and it's a bit of a dream come true, really, as a Pools fan. Well, I say that sometimes it's a dream come true. At other times, it's a living nightmare when things aren't going well, as you can imagine. But we get really good access to the club. And I mean, when I first started out in this role about a year ago, it was like meeting my heroes, and everyone's been fantastic. I mean, we've already had 3 different managers, Darren Sarll included, who I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later on. So there's been a fairly high turnaround of both players and management in the year that I've been here. And as ever, it's up and down, covering, supporting, following Hartlepool United. I'm the eldest of 3 siblings, and my dad is a big Hartlepool United fan, born and raised in the town. I, as you can probably tell by my accent, had never lived in the town until I got the job and moved up here. But I was sort of press ganged into supporting the team before I even really knew what Hartlepool was or where it was or if they even had a football team. I was running around in my Hartlepool United top, went to football training with all my friends wearing Liverpool, Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, whatever, something like that. I was always in my Hartlepool top. So I'm not sure I had much of a choice in the matter, Jacob, but I wouldn't have it any other way nonetheless.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant to support your local team, even if you're not so local. You start supporting them. It's definitely good to be doing that. So.
Like that.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. As you say, glad to see that you're kind of relishing covering them as well, and as you say, through thick and thin. And there's been kind of plenty of examples of either of those, I'm sure. And I guess that's one of the places to start, really. And one of the reasons that I reached out to you is I think Twitter/X, the algorithm on there kind of found that I was quite interested in Hartlepool. Obviously, since Darren Sarll became manager, with a lot of intrigue to see how he was going to do, really. Because I guess on one hand, you kind of think, well, we've let him go from Woking. Was that, kind of a mistake? And could we have kept him for longer? And would he have done better? But obviously, on the other kind of hand, it is good to see kind of ex-managers and stuff do well again and see how they kind of fare. So it was kind of with a lot of intrigue. But I think I was just looking online, and I can't really trust stats that I find on Wikipedia too much. But I think, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, obviously from covering it so closely, but I think his record in the end was something like kind of played 15 games and won 4 before he was dismissed. I'm not sure if that was the league or if that was the cups included as well, although I think he went out quite early in the cups, which was led to his dismissal, or one of the reasons. So I guess it was kind of a really disappointing start to the season after a summer where everyone was kind of looking forward to a new manager. But I guess if you go one step even before Darren Sarll, I gather over the summer there was quite a lot of turbulence over the managerial position, and I'm not sure, reading from kind of the comments online when Darren first came in, I don't think he was the first choice for a lot of Pools fans.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't. Darren Sarll's tenure didn't last long, but there was so much controversy and contention packed into that relatively short space of time. As people that have followed Darren Sarll's career, they'll know that he's no stranger to controversy. The first thing I would say about Darren Sarll is as a man, I always found him really good to deal with. He was always honest. He was always open. He was always happy to chat. He always took time to ask us about how things were going in both our personal and professional lives. And he came under pressure pretty quickly during his time at Pools. But as a personal relationship, I always got on well with him. So I think it's important to put that out there. But yeah, as you say, it was a controversial beginning to what proved actually one of the most controversial managerial reigns in Hartlepool United's recent history. And let me tell you, there have been a few contentious managers that we've had in recent years. So it was interesting to say the least. As you say, it sort of started under a cloud of controversy because the previous manager was Kevin Phillips, who will be a name familiar to loads of football fans, no matter who you support, really. An England international, a Sunderland legend, winner of the European Golden Shoe, scored 30 goals in a single Premier League season, obviously had a really prodigious playing career. He was appointed midway through last season. He replaced John Askey, who was a really nice man, but by the end, I think it had run out of ideas. He tried everything to turn the ship that is Hartlepool United around. We were relegated from League Two and had a really disappointing first half of the National League campaign, to the point that we were at one point threatened with relegation when Kevin Phillips came in. Interestingly, at the time of Kevin Phillips's appointment, Darren Sarll was among the bookies' favourites as well, and went down to really short odds before not getting the job, which is maybe something we'll come back to later. But Kevin Phillips did a really good job. Certainly initially won 4 of his first 5 games, and he inherited a team that was really struggling, by the way, really lacking in confidence. We were conceding loads of goals. We got into a really unfortunate habit of conceding in the first 10 minutes of pretty much every match that we played. So he made a really instant impact, and it tailed off somewhat. We lost 7-1 to Gateshead, who are to some extent a sort of local rival. So that was a fairly humbling defeat, but he galvanized the team, and we beat Halifax, who were chasing the playoffs, 1-0 3 days later. So there was a lot of good about Kevin Phillips's short tenure. He signed an initial 3-month contract until the end of the season. We won on the final day against already relegated Dorking, which got us to 60 points. We finished 12th. It was unspectacular, but it certainly wasn't a season short of drama and turbulence. And if you were to listen to Kevin Phillips's account, 60 points was probably a pre-agreed target that would trigger a contract extension, because when it ended up that he wasn't offered a new contract, he alleged through his representatives he'd been initially offered a 2-year deal as a reward, if you like, for what he'd managed to achieve in the role, and that was later withdrawn. The news of Kevin Phillips's departure broke a week after the season ended, and 15 minutes later, Darren Sarll was announced as the new boss. So that was a real surprise. I mean, it's easy to say looking back now. I think personally, as a lot of fans would probably say, I would have given Kevin Phillips another contract. I mean, he did well in difficult circumstances, and also he was a big name. He had interesting footballing ideas, but there was no airs and graces about him. He was willing to drop down he started out in the National League North with South Shields, and then moved to Hartlepool in the National League. So he was willing to cut his teeth at a lower level than he'd played at, and I think he had some exciting ideas. So it was a bit of a shame that was cut short. But Darren Sarll came in with a lot more National League experience than Kevin Phillips. I think that was perhaps the thing that attracted the Hartlepool United hierarchy to him. As I said, he was rumoured to be in line for the job in January. He'd obviously just been most recently manager of Woking and had some success there before, obviously a difficult end to his time there. He'd had some success at Yeovil, sort of similar story as well, reached the playoffs with them in his first season in charge. So although there was some skepticism about the decision to get rid of Kevin Phillips, I think there was some cautious optimism about the decision to appoint Sarll. And over the summer, he did a lot of things right. We felt like the recruitment was generally really good. He intriguingly focused on recruiting players with links to the Northeast. He, like myself, is probably conscious of being something of an outsider in the area. He wanted to recruit players who, I suppose, know what it means. It's a sort of unique footballing culture at Hartlepool, especially when they're in the National League. There's a lot of pressure from the fan base. They believe that Hartlepool should be a Football League club, which is where they've spent a lot of their history. But that's obviously not always the in line with the footballing reality, but Sarll wanted to get players who I think understood what it meant. Pre-season was okay, more positives than not, and we started the season actually really well. We took 7 points from our first 3 games. We beat Yeovil, our longest journey of the season, 1-0 at Hewish Park on the opening day. We beat Tamworth away as well, and we drew against Southend with 10 men. So 7 points from the first 3 matches, 3 clean sheets as well, and it all looked to be going really, really well. From there, to be honest, it didn't take long for the wheels to start to fall off. Actually, the defeat at Woking on the August bank holiday was one of the first signs that things were not perhaps going to turn out as Hartlepool United had hoped. We were 2-0 up when we received a red card, a needless red card, and that was one of the things that Darren Sarll had worked hard to. He wanted to make the team more aggressive. Certainly the team last season were probably too passive, too easy to play against. But I think some of the players followed his instructions with a little bit too much gusto. We had 4 red cards in our first 10 league matches, which obviously made things extremely difficult. And there were other problems as well, as perhaps Woking fans and people that follow Woking will appreciate. The style of play is quite direct. We had some fairly technical players that Sarll inherited who he really struggled to get the best out of because of his style. Adam Campbell arrived as a marquee signing, having just won promotion to League One with Crawley, another one with loads of links to the local area, had done really well at Gateshead, won the National League North title with them and at rivals Darlington as well. But he certainly didn't suit the style of play. Actually came out and said the first few months at Pools had been the most frustrating of his entire career. So the style of play was an issue. The discipline was an issue. We started to lose our goal scoring touch. In Manny Disarue and Joe Gray, we had 2 strikers who scored a combined 38 goals between them last season, but they were starting to struggle. We actually didn't score a goal at home for almost 7 hours of 7 hours of football at home. And then there was a real disconnect between Darren Sarll and, it would seem, the dressing room. Things like Adam Campbell's comment about his level of frustration certainly would suggest that. It didn't really look like the players were playing for him, and the fans, as supporters of any team will know, it's really important that your manager can strike up a healthy relationship with the fan base. And fairly quickly there started to be a sort of ill feeling between supporters and Sarll. He made some comments in the direction of fans after defeat at Forest Green Rovers in September. That was the 4th defeat in succession and the 4th game in a row we'd failed to score. So I think supporters felt it was difficult to stomach that he was criticising perhaps some of their views and opinions, given that Pools were effectively in free fall at the start of the season. Again, Woking fans might be able to relate to this. He was very keen to try and make sure he got round all corners of the ground, and he would applaud the fan base. And that was great. I think that could really have endeared him to supporters. But when things started to go badly, it was entirely different. You know, supporters would be venting their frustration at him, and he became more and more visibly frustrated at that, to the point that he said in another explosive post-match interview, I mean, as a journalist, it was great because there was always something exciting happening during his tenure. He said that he had received what he described as an unacceptable level of personal abuse. I think fans, again, found that difficult to stomach. I mean, everyone's definition of unacceptable level of personal abuse is probably different. We know supporters are we know football's an emotional game, but equally we know that there is a line that should not be crossed. Sarll certainly felt that line had been crossed. Perhaps supporters didn't quite feel the same way. And the bottom line is that football is a results business. Didn't win very many games. I think we were 16th by the time of his departure, and the final game, as you alluded to, the cup, we were knocked out of the 4th qualifying round by National League North Brackley. And for all Brackley, actually a really good side and really impressed us. It was obviously a fairly humbling experience, and so that was the brief and controversial era of Darren Sarll. Lots of drama, lots of divisiveness. Sadly, not a lot of excitement on the football pitch, lots of excitement off it, but as an individual, got on with him really well. Plenty of mutual respect there, I think. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out, and it was fairly clear, fairly quickly, that was going to be the case.
Yeah, it does seem, looking back now, kind of looking at the dates of stuff, it was really kind of quite quick. And I guess when you've kind of got the ambitions of a club like Hartlepool, it can turn like that, because obviously when people want to be finishing playoffs, if not even higher, if you're, as you say, if you're 16th and you're struggling and you go out of the cup, which is obviously a big financial thing for clubs as well, especially at this level. So that can become really difficult. And it was really similar actually between the way that it fell apart at Woking and Hartlepool, because we went out, obviously started the season badly. The first season under him obviously was brilliant, got into the playoffs for the first time, and I think the recruitment in the summer was the one thing that Woking fans will say it just didn't work for many reasons. There were so many players that we signed that ended up just not working out, and he signed all of them. But yeah, started the season badly and then went out the FA Cup to Ramsgate, I think it was, in what was a kind of one of the upsets of the round, and that was kind of financially bad news for the club as much as anything. And then I think we lost to Oxford City the week later, who were kind of bottom for pretty much the whole season, and I think that was the writing was on the wall. But as I say, I think people would say that the one thing that he did get wrong was the recruitment. But do you think there's one single thing that you could say that he would look back and probably think he got wrong at Hartlepool? Or was it just so many factors? It seems like you run through so many things there that it's maybe hard to put your finger on one thing.
Yeah, I think actually, in a slight contrast to Woking, you mentioned Oxford City, by the way. I remember that season, Hartlepool were beaten 5-2 by Oxford City. So I certainly feel your pain in that regard. We felt that the recruitment was actually quite strong. I mean, there was a sense that Sarll had watched the team multiple times prior to Kevin Phillips's departure. That was one of the reasons why it was so controversial, not just the fact that Phillips felt an offer of a contract had been withdrawn, but the fact that Sarll was the favourite in January and then seemed to have watched the players very closely in the time between January and his appointment in April suggested, and the fact that Kevin Phillips was given a 3-month contract suggested that perhaps there was a gentleman's agreement, or maybe even more than that he was going to come in and take over in the summer. I mean, his first act pretty much as manager was to run the rule over the released and retained list. I think we ended up releasing something like 10 players, and that was only 48 hours after his appointment. But we were told that he was the man who had made those decisions. So presumably he hadn't just plucked the names out of a hat, and he had a fairly good idea. But what it did allow was that he could sort of identify where we were strong and where we were weak. We had an almost complete overhaul of central midfield. We've signed 4 new central midfielders, one of whom in particular, Nathan Sharon, has been really successful. So the signings have certainly they've been mixed, as is often the case, particularly at national league level, when you don't necessarily have the same scouting network. You don't have the same privilege of being able to watch countless hours of games on television or whatever. It is more challenging, but the recruitment probably wasn't his downfall. I think the clash of personalities between Sarll and supporters, and also the dressing room. I mean, we obviously don't know exactly what went on in the dressing room, but a number of the better performers from last season didn't seem to see eye to eye with Sarll, and I think some of that was because of the style of play, which was so direct and so route one, and some of that was because of Sarll's character. It would be difficult. It's difficult to gloss over the fact that he has had his fair share of controversies in the past. He's not a man who's got on well with everyone historically, and obviously I know that Woking, there was a flare up towards the end of his time as well. It's very difficult for me to say yes, there were definitely issues in the dressing room, but I would certainly suggest so. And a number of the players that had performed so well, whether that was because of a clash of personalities, whether that was because they struggled to adapt to his style, a number of players that performed so well really started to struggle. Manny Disarue scored 25 goals last season in all competitions, 23 in the National League, only the 4th Hartlepool United player in the last 50 years to reach 20 goals in a single league season. He scored 2 goals in his first 11 games under Darren Sarll. I mean, he was an incredibly isolated and frustrated figure. Sarll then dropped him, which was a really controversial decision, and things almost came to a head, if you like. We were playing Sutton, and he'd named a he'd named a starting 11 who had not scored a single league goal all season, because he dropped Manny Disarue and he dropped Joe Gray, who was another of the better players, scored 13 goals the previous season and over 100 pools appearances, and is still only 21. So he named a team without a single goal scorer or a single player that scored a goal all season. And we were 2-0 down within 25 minutes, and things started to turn really nasty on the terraces. He brought on Joe Gray and Manny Disarue before the halftime whistle, and Gray changed the game. Disarue scored a second half hat-trick, first ever Hartlepool player to come off the bench and score a hat-trick. And it was great because we won the game 4-3, and in many ways that saved Sarll's skin, at least for another few weeks. But in some ways it was also like a clear rebuke to what he was trying to do, because he was trying to sideline some of the star players who also had a lot of credit in the bank with fans, and it just suggested that his way of doing things just wasn't working out. The clash with the supporters as well was massive. I mean, one of the things at Hartlepool, because they've been in the Football League for so long, is there's a real expectation that this club should not be in the National League, and whether that matches up with the reality or not, it doesn't necessarily come into the thinking of some of the more passionate supporters, as I'm sure a lot of fans will appreciate. Everyone sees the game differently, but Pools fans feel they belong in the Football League, even if they don't necessarily have the biggest budget, best squad. There's loads of good teams in the National League. Sometimes that doesn't matter. You've got to be winning games, and if you're not winning games, I think it's important that fans see that there's a clear way of doing things, that things are going in the right direction. And that never really looked to be the case under Sarll. I mean, in his last month, he played 4-2-3-1. He played a 4-4-2 with a diamond. He then switched to 3-5-2, then back to 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3. It was impossible to know what he was going to do next. And it felt like he was grappling around in the dark for a solution. And it was, in the end, a solution that never came.
Well, thankfully, you do seem to be on kind of a bit of an upward curve after that, which is always nice. I think a similar thing has happened at Woking this season. Both teams had their manager kind of, well, you did it long before Christmas. We did it just before Christmas, and have kind of got a bit of a bounce going since then. That's always nice to kind of feel like you're back on track. So I think at the moment, Hartlepool sit 4 points outside the playoffs, but it's very congested there, because that means they're sitting down in 13th. So there's quite a lot of teams in that mix. But in terms of the kind of the new structure that's coming, so I think it's headed up by Lenny Lawrence as manager. But another name that Woking fans will be familiar with is Anthony Limbrick, who was our first team manager for almost a season when we got relegated quite a few years ago now. But it seems like there's quite a few people involved, coaches and managers and stuff like that. So how's it kind of all coming together off the pitch, and how's that kind of related into a change of form on the pitch?
Yeah, it's been fascinating, because obviously after Darren Sarll left, Lenny Lawrence has been involved at the club in one way or another now for 2 or 3 years. He initially took over as what the club termed rather mysteriously as a non-executive director. He had a spell as caretaker manager last season as well, prior to the appointment of Kevin Phillips, and then he worked as one of Kevin Phillips's 2 assistant managers. During Darren Sarll's era, he returned to the boardroom temporarily, and then as things started to go wrong under Sarll, Lenny Lawrence would actually appear in the dugout at half-time of matches, which was, I think, a fairly clear suggestion that the club didn't have complete faith in Sarll, and probably sent a bit of a message to Darren Sarll as well. Lenny took over as caretaker for the second time in October. I mean, an absolute legend of a man. He turned 77 in December. As far as I can tell, that makes him the third oldest active manager in the world, and the only other two, the Romanian national team manager and Dick Advocat, who'll be a name familiar to many fans of English football, who's currently in charge of the Curacao national team. So I think Lenny's the oldest active domestic manager. When he first took over, the expectation was that it would just be temporarily again, but we won 1 and drew 2 of his 3 matches in interim charge, and it started to become fairly clear that he was going to be appointed on a permanent basis. The club then moved to recruit Anthony Limbrick, who, as you say, is a name very familiar to Woking fans. He is the new head coach, and Gavin Skelton, who was at Carlisle's assistant manager for 5 pretty long and successful years. He is the club's first team coach. The expectation is that Anthony Limbrick will succeed Lenny Lawrence as manager at some stage. Quite when that will be, or whether it will indeed happen, obviously is going to depend a little bit on results and how well things go. But so far, so good. I think, Lenny Lawrence is obviously he's had a really long and successful career. His first job in management was in 1978, at which time Anthony Limbrick still wasn't born. He was caretaker of Plymouth, and then he's had so much success, almost 10 years in charge of Charlton, took them back to the first division despite really trying financial circumstances, won promotion with Middlesbrough. He was one of the inaugural 20 Premier League managers. They won promotion in the season prior to the creation of the Premier League. Loads of success as a manager, and obviously he's got a really long list of contacts as well. We've had people in on loan from Crystal Palace and Charlton, just a couple of his former clubs, and he's been sort of a calming presence at the top. I think he has the final say over tactics and team selection, and then you've got Limbrick and Skelton, who do a lot of the day-to-day work. They also have a say in how the team sets up, and certainly Pools are trying to play more attractive football than what they did under Darren Sarll. They're trying to build through the thirds. They're trying to be more patient, possession-based, quick on the counter. And in general, that's worked really well. I think the league record since Lenny Lawrence took over is 5 wins, 6 draws, and 2 defeats. Starting to close in on the playoffs, as you said. I wonder if they might have given themselves a little bit too much to do, because as you said, it's very congested and very competitive in there. There's a few teams as well that have got 2-3 games in hand on Pools as well. So that's going to be interesting from a Woking perspective. And it pains me to say this, it's probably a good time to play Pools. It's been a really, really dramatic week at the club. We hadn't played since New Year's Day. Our scheduled trip to Barnet was one of a load of National League games that fell foul of the weather. Then we didn't have a game in midweek. But unfortunately, what did happen is a video of a training ground bust up leaked online, and then was subsequently shared on social media. So that caused a bit of controversy prior to our trip to Wildston on Saturday, who are obviously struggling down towards the bottom. The news broke that 2 of our most important attacking players have sustained long-term injuries as well. And looking at the team on Saturday, when we had a slightly disappointing 1-1 draw, and actually, to be honest, we're lucky to get away with a point against a Wealdstone side who really dominated, particularly in the second half of that game. But it's been a controversial week at Pools, given the training ground bust up and then a couple of injuries. There is a hope that there's going to be a move to strengthen the squad. Lenny Lawrence said funds have been made available to do so. But it's been a contentious season. It always seems to be a contentious time following Pools, but this week has probably been the most controversial, most challenging since Lenny Lawrence replaced Darren Sarll.
There's never a dull moment following the team, obviously. And actually, to be fair, looking back at our game earlier in the season, as you were saying, Hartlepool kind of raced into a 2-0 lead, kind of 2 goals in the first 10 minutes for Gray, but then obviously the red card comes and Woking turn it around and win 3-2. I mean, the funny thing about that run, looking back, is I think we won 3 games on the bounce and then we didn't win for like months. It's one of those things and how it goes. So I guess you'll feel probably quite, not hard done by, but it's quite unfortunate, I guess, when stuff like that happens. It sounds like that was quite a common thing, as you mentioned earlier, with kind of quite a few red cards earlier in the season. So obviously that's quite hard to get results. But is that a similar kind of team that Woking are going to come up against on Saturday in terms of personnel and tactics, or is it kind of completely changed with the kind of the management change?
Well, that game in August, I think it was the bank holiday, wasn't it? That was actually my birthday. So thanks very much to everyone connected with Woking Football Club for completely ruining my birthday. It was great for 20 minutes, and then obviously it was it was disappointing, especially to concede as they did so late on. But it was, I mean, after the red card, it was really backs to the wall stuff. So no complaints there, no complaints with the decision. It was I think Jack Hunter, one of our new recruits in midfield, rather carelessly steamed into a couple of challenges in quick succession and probably deserved to be sent off. Well, I mentioned that the 2 injuries that we've sustained. Joe Gray, who scored the 2 goals in the reverse fixture, is one of those players who's just been ruled out for for between 4 and 6 weeks. We think he's undergone a pre-planned groin operation. He'd been playing through the pain for a couple of months, but that's one of those things that eventually just has to happen. So we'll be without him. Adam Campbell, another player who's been fairly influential, is just coming back from injury. We're not sure whether he's going to be in the side or not, but there have certainly been changes made under Lenny Lawrence. In recent weeks, we've actually played, well, the last 2 matches against Oldham and Wealdstone, we've played 4-4-2, which we haven't tended to. We've usually played 4-2-3-1, but the fact that we've had injuries to Joe Gray and Anthony Mancini, who's another one of the forward players who is very temperamental. He does seem to get injured a lot, but he's also enormously talented, probably the most naturally sort of bums off seats, exciting, creative player that we've got. So we'll be without Mancini and Gray. We might well be without Campbell. We've got 2 imposing physical strikers in Manny Disarua, who has scored plenty of goals over the last 18 months. I think he scored 11 in all competitions this season. Not quite hit the heights he did last term, but nonetheless has been doing reasonably well, especially since the change in management. And we've got Gary Medine, who is a name who will be very familiar to a lot of football fans. He's 34 now, but he's been scoring pretty regularly of late. 6 goals in his last 6 games, I think, averaging a goal every 28 minutes of late. So it remains to be seen whether we will stick with the 4-4-2 to an extent. Lenny Lawrence's hand has been forced because of the injuries, but 4-2-3-1 has been the favoured shape. Nicky Featherstone and Nathan Sharon have been very solid in central midfield, as have Tom Parks and Luke Waterfall in central defence. 2 good, experienced defenders. But Pools will try and play a bit more than I think probably Woking fans saw in the reverse fixture in August, that they'll try and dominate the ball a bit more if they can. And the one thing that they've lost in recent weeks is probably a little bit of pace in the side, especially in the absence of Joe Gray. So they've had to change ever so slightly in terms of that, and maybe we're a little bit more direct on Saturday. But certainly the emphasis has been on more patient, possession-based build-up. So not necessarily wholesale changes. I don't think Lenny Lawrence has tried to reinvent the wheel since Darren Sarll has departed, but certainly there will be noticeable changes. But from a Pools perspective, we're all waiting to see how they're going to cope without those 2 important players in Joe Gray and Anthony Mancini.
Another name that kind of has played for both, I guess, is Sas Davies. I did see him on the team sheet a few times earlier in the season. Has he continued to get minutes, or has he because I assume he was a Darren Sarll signing, because he played for us when Sarll was in charge of us. I don't know if that's kind of impacted his playing time with the change of management, and if he has been playing, kind of how's his form been?
Yeah, he's been really unlucky. You know, Billy Sas Davies is a player that I really like, actually. He's decent on the ball, not always perfect, but he will try and play out from the back. He's obviously physically big, really good in the air. He's quite athletic as well, certainly more athletic than our 2 starting centre-halves at the moment, Luke Waterfall and Tom Parks. And he's been unfortunate. Tom Parks, who just signed a new contract, incidentally, last week, that's going to keep him at the Prestige Group Stadium until the end of next season, has probably been one of the outstanding performers. Left-sided centre-half, loads of experience, more than 150 games for Bristol Rovers. He's played in all but one of our games this season, 28 of 29 matches he's featured in. Actually, he was forced off through injury in the reverse against Woking, and that was, perhaps as well as the red card, another one of the reasons why we suffered. Luke Waterfall is the club captain. He's playing ahead of Sas Davies at the minute. He's captain Lincoln and Grimsby to promotion from the National League, but has had a more difficult season this time around. He was sent off twice in his first 4 appearances, as I said, trying to implement Darren Sarll's new aggressive approach with a little bit too much gusto. And when Waterfall was suspended, that opened the door for Sas Davies, and he had a real run in the side at the end of Darren Sarll's tenure and at the beginning of Lenny Lawrence's too. He just got unlucky. He had a clash of heads in the game at York in November. He was able to continue and finish that game, but then later on in the week in training, he started to complain that he was feeling ill and a little bit dizzy, and he was eventually ruled out with concussion. And since then, Luke Waterfall returned to the side, and Pools have defended reasonably well. I think Lenny Lawrence prefers the experienced pair to Sas Davies, and so he hasn't been in the side much of late, but I would not say nonetheless that the signs have been really promising. You're right that he was a Darren Sarll signing, and at the moment he's the third choice centre half. And while Parks and Waterfall remain fit, I don't think we'll see much of him. But I think he's certainly shown enough to suggest that he could have a good career at Pools. And obviously there'll be plenty of players now considering their futures. Are they going to get a new deal? Are they going to have to look elsewhere? And he's definitely one that I'd like to see Pools persist with, because he's still only 24, and I think he's got a lot of the attributes to be successful.
Looking to the future, it seems like obviously, as you mentioned, kind of close to the playoffs, not that far off. Obviously, going on a run with a couple of wins, and as you mentioned, teams have games in hand and stuff like that. So it's hard to predict sometimes. But I guess the aim is still the playoffs. And do you think there's a feeling from fans and the club that that's still achievable this season?
Well, playoffs is always the aim at this level with Hartlepool. To be honest, I could be talking to you and we could be rooted to the bottom of the table, and there'd still be supporters who would be demanding a playoff push in the second half of the season. I still think it's realistic. I think Pools will need to strengthen, given the injuries that they've had. If you'd asked me this a couple of weeks ago, I would have said absolutely. Pools seem to have so much momentum. We beat Oldham, who were unbeaten in eight, prior to when they came to our place on New Year's Day. Probably our best performance of the season, and it seemed like we had loads and loads of momentum at that stage. And given the week that's just gone with the training ground bust up, the two big injuries, slightly disappointing performance last time out as well, that's changed things a little bit. I think there's more cautious optimism than anything, but Pools do still have a little bit of momentum. The next few weeks are going to be telling in terms of whether they're able to maintain that momentum. Certainly fans are hoping that there's going to be at least one new addition, maybe two, potentially in time for Saturday's game, but certainly in the next couple of weeks. That really needs to happen, I think, if Pools are going to be serious about challenging for the playoffs. Because of their disappointing start to the season, they've obviously got a bit of catching up to do, and it's so competitive. They've got a run of games, I think, that they will see as relatively winnable. They go to Barnet in midweek next week, but other than that, I think they play 5 teams out of the next 6 that are in the bottom half. Of course, it's not a good time at all to be playing Woking. I imagine that Woking players and supporters will be arriving in the northeast full of confidence, given their really impressive recent run. Obviously, in Neil Ardley, a really good experienced manager who knows this level like the back of his hand. So it's probably not the best time for Pools to be playing Woking, and it's probably a decent time for Woking to be playing Pools in truth. But there's still hope that the playoffs are a realistic possibility. It's going to require a run of potentially 3 wins on the bounce at some stage to get themselves right in the hunt, and it's probably going to require a couple of new additions to strengthen the squad as well. But we're still believing, that's for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't get Pools fans too down about Saturday and your chances. I think we're kind of in a similar stage at the moment. There's a bit of a crisis in our defence, in as much as Harries has just been sold to Forest Green. Money's going to become available to replace him, but I think obviously that's going to take time. And Max Dyche as well, who's our other kind of starting centre back, kind of picked up an injury just before Christmas, and now he's been recalled by Northampton, who are his parent club. He was meant to be here for the full season, but now he's been recalled, and the defence is kind of being pulled all over the place, because we've already got Dan Moss, who's playing right back out, and yeah, it's got a little bit chaotic there. So I think that there's a few nerves from Woking fans as well. But obviously we're running a very different race this season, so kind of getting to that level of points where you're going to be safe. 50 points normally does it, but last season it didn't. So we'll maybe budget for 55 or something this season just to be safe. So there's hope for Pools on Saturday, but it should make for an interesting encounter. But I must push you for some sort of prediction on the game.
Well, look, Pools are going to feel like it's a game that they need to win. I've obviously had a really lovely time on this chatting to you, Jacob. So I don't want to go and predict a massive win to Pools or whatever. And Woking, as I say, they certainly look to be a team in form. I saw that Kian Harries had left, and I saw that Max Dyche had left as well. I believe I'm right in thinking that you have Timmy Odesina on your books, who was who won promotion with Pools. So I don't know whether we'll potentially be seeing him or not. I think Pools will feel that if they don't win on Saturday, then it's going to be very, very difficult for them to make the playoffs. The home form has been good under Lenny Lawrence, still to taste defeat at the Prestige Group Stadium since he replaced Sarll. I think there might not be as much pace in the side as supporters would like, but there are goals in the side with Manny Disarui and Gary Medine, who's in a rich vein of form. So I'm going to go for 2-1 to Pools, but let's hope that it's an entertaining encounter.
Yeah, I would have seen it actually another one. I think there's some reports he might even be out for the whole season. So yeah, he's been really unfortunate with injuries. So yeah, there just seems to be so many. It's just across football at all levels these days. It just seems to be so many players picking up injuries. So yeah, it's almost like you talk about the squad and then the actual available squad is something completely different. So but yeah, on his day, great player, and we were kind of delighted to sign him in the summer. So it's just disappointing that yeah, injuries are kind of hampering his experience. So yeah, unfortunately not one you'll see, but similar to what you were saying earlier about signing players, yeah, hopefully there might be some kind of movements inwards. So by the time we get to Saturday, things could look pretty different for either side. So you know, we would probably take a draw. So I'll maybe we could negotiate on that.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
2-2.
Exactly.
But no, cool. Thank you very much for that prediction, and thank you very much for joining us. It's been great insights. And if you don't get promotion this season and we don't get relegated, then maybe we can do something similar again next season.
I have a feeling we might be chatting again next season in that case, Jacob.
Oh, well, I look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Robbie for joining us. Brilliant insights on what we can expect this weekend at Hartlepool, and a good overview of everything that's gone on there this season. Massively interesting with so many connections to Woking, and I'm sure it's a club that a few people have been keeping a close eye on. So tough game probably this weekend, I think, especially with the kind of the attacking threats that they have and the kind of defensive frailties that we kind of seem to have at the moment, kind of with injuries and players leaving. So an interesting one coming up at Hartlepool this Saturday, and just having a quick look over some of the latest goings on at Kingfield since we last spoke, and just covering some of those. I think the most interesting kind of activity has been the ins and outs, really. Obviously on the pitch we can discuss that stuff as well. Kind of still unbeaten since the change of manager, which is brilliant, and getting some points on the board, which we desperately need. And obviously just not losing games, that's a pretty nice position to be in, and isn't something we got to enjoy in certainly the first half of the season. There were sort of a lot of losses there, so you got to take it. But just looking at some of the outs, I think since last time we spoke, Leahy, Conte, and Dyche all returning to their parent clubs. Dyche obviously with a kind of non-footballing injury, but also seems to have been recalled to play for them. I think there was a gap in their defence, and they've recalled him. So that's kind of a bit of a shame for us, but not a massive surprise. I think when you get a player on a on a long-term loan or even short-term loans, that they can be recalled pretty much at any point. So it's always the risk when you do those things. But I think given the fact that he's been recalled halfway through his season-long loan this season, was recalled last time as well, kind of leaving us in a spot of bother, really, because I think towards the end of last season when he got recalled, we didn't really have the time or resources to sort out many replacements, and it's kind of left us in the lurch a couple of times now. So I think it's probably the time, unless we're going to kind of sign Dyche on a full-time contract and make him our player, probably to kind of maybe stop bringing him back. If Northampton is going to recall him kind of as and when they want, obviously that's their right to, but we don't want to kind of be losing players, unexpectedly whenever they need them back. I think Conte and Lee here are probably easier ones to make cases for them going back. I don't think we'd have kept them on even if they wanted to stay, and the clubs were happy for them to stay. Obviously they're taking up kind of spaces in the squad, and Jody I think has made good points about shrinking the squad and having more quality. And I think both of them players, obviously both pretty young as well and looking for experience, but it's not really worked out for them at Woking, and I'm sure they'll go elsewhere and get playing time. And it'll be interesting to see what goes on and what happens to him. But Conte was probably the biggest surprise for me. I think when we signed him, Cardiff fans were kind of really excited about this player, which isn't a surprise for loan players. This kind of happens all the time. And sometimes the players don't really live up to those expectations. Sometimes they do, but I think some of the shouts from Cardiff fans saying, "Well, he could easily be in their squad in the Championship," probably were a little bit ambitious. So aware he did get some minutes in their first team, but I think from what we saw, certainly in the positions we were playing him in, he's got a long way to go. To figure it out, even at this level, let alone any higher. So, be interesting to see what happens there as well. And Lee He, again, didn't make a massive impact. I think his probably some of his best performances came in the National League Cup or whatever that competition is called that we're out of now. So we won't bother focusing on that too much. But it was good to have some squad depth, I guess, and players that could play in that. But outside of that, I think his impact was pretty limited. Obviously, the final name, Harry's going to Forest Green. Now that's going to be the biggest one. I think that kind of left us short last weekend for the Ebbsfleet game and caught everyone by surprise. Probably a little bit on the Friday when that got announced. I think it was mentioned as well. He would have been in the team on the Saturday, which is no surprise given how light we are at the back. But I think picking up a fee for a player is always great for a team at this level as long as it's the right price. I think the really interesting thing by Jody as well, kind of mentioned in the notes on the official club statement on it, was that I think if he played a certain number of games, I think I'm right in saying that he would have been offered an extension into next season. Now, my understanding is that he was kind of one of our top earners, or had one of the highest wages in the squad this season. Whether that's true or not, I'm unsure. Happy to be corrected on it, but that was certainly one of our big signings in the summer. Obviously, Harry's is someone who had a good relationship with Doyle. Turner as well. I believe that kind of those guys knew each other, so probably not a big surprise that he kind of made the short trip from Aldershot to Woking, and signed as one of kind of the marquee signings. But when you got a chance to kind of cash in, and I think as mentioned, it's kind of more of a look towards next season as well, and that actually also carries into some of the ins as well. Permanent transfers now. What I would kind of expect to see is players that are coming in, if it's on a permanent and we're taking them from another club, or they're players that we really want, it's probably offering them 18-month deals so that we're a bit ahead of ourselves when we get to the summer, rather than having to build a brand new squad and hand out deals then. If you can get someone you really want on an 18-month deal now, then obviously they're covered for next season. Effiong is obviously one of those. Will play the rest of this season, so that has an amazing impact already, with kind of his goals and just the way he plays. So good to have him tied up for next season as well. But other players that are on kind of more short term deals, that's to be expected as well. But it'll be interesting to see. I think when we're looking at that centre back position now, which we have to do, we can't. I don't think we can get away with it much longer. This defence, this back four, has kind of been in flux since just around the Christmas period, and it's kind of not getting better. It's getting worse, with kind of Kelly Evans getting injured, players leaving the club, and players coming in. I just don't think the level of the quality that we need if we're gonna make any progress. But we'll have to see on that. It feels like some of the signings so far have been kind of good players for the squad, but I certainly wouldn't be relying on some of them. Especially if we do get dragged into a full-on relegation fight. We're not out of it at the moment. Kind of 5 points between us and the relegation zone as we speak on Wednesday, but it's quite easy to get dragged back into that. Our next few games are very difficult. Some really tough away games. Hartlepool, York, Dagenham all coming up. Elsewhere in February, you got Solihull and Forest Green. Solihull at home, Forest Green away. So that's obviously going to be a tricky run of games as well. So other teams as well. I think some teams have some games in hand on us. So if things don't go our way in our games, and also other teams start to pick up points, that 5 point buffer is going to start to disappear, and then you're kind of really relying on players that we've kind of dragged in to really perform and keep us up. So I think we do need more experience, certainly at the back. But I appreciate the club won't go out there and just sign any old player. It's kind of got to be the right player, and if we can get those players that we can sign up for the rest of the season and next year as well, then that's going to really help with the putting the squad together. And then when we get to the summer, that's going to make a big difference, and can mean that we're looking at fewer players, and we're kind of adding to the squad rather than having to do a complete rebuild. So that's kind of the the ins and outs. I think would certainly expect more to happen there. So it'll be an interesting time. I keep saying this; it's an exciting time. I think we said that on the very first podcast with everything that's going on at the moment. But it certainly feels like things are moving in the right direction, kind of on and off the pitch. And yeah, it's just having patience with it really. And I think with the results the way they've been, everyone can be pretty pleased with those. I think just kind of seeing, obviously, there's been a few draws in there. Obviously, the Ebbsfleet one, most recently probably being the most disappointing of those. But it does feel like we're kind of down to the bare bones, and that result didn't come as a massive surprise to me anyway. I think what you're going to start to see from especially February onwards, is those teams, right down the bottom, really scrapping for every result. Ebbsfleet are probably already gone. They're going to have probably a really low points tally. But as we saw last season, with teams like Dorking and Kidderminster, teams will go on runs and pull off performances. I think Dorking kind of even beat Chesterfield towards the end of last season. Kidderminster was seemingly winning every week for a certain point before they tailed off. So it's not just a case of turning up against teams and winning, and we're down there ourselves. So I think we can still cause teams problems though, and I think we saw that in the Yeovil game. They're you know they think they're kind of pushing for the playoffs. I think they're probably a very mid-table team. They weren't that impressive, I don't think, on the day, and neither were we for 60 minutes. I think kind of the last half an hour, when we changed the tactics and changed the personnel, we looked a lot more dangerous. And I think that's probably the final point, is judging how the kind of Ardley era is going, is I think it's just nice to see a manager that can change things in game. It's not going to work every week, I think, especially picking up a team that's not his team. There's the issues we've had, and why we've signed some of the players we have, isn't really down to him. There'll be a clean slate probably next season, but for now, I think he's kind of working. With the squad he's been given, with a couple of additions, but as we talked about with the injuries and players leaving, things are really tricky. But it's good to see him using those resources, and if something doesn't work for 60 minutes, like it didn't at Yeovil when 1-0 down, the last 30 minutes was like watching a completely different game, and we could have won that. But also we could have lost it. I think even looking at injury time, there we were going for a goal, and then Yeovil were going for a goal. Both teams wanted to win, but a draw probably a fair result. So that might be the blueprint for some of these games coming up, which are really tough games. But it's good to see that we're scoring goals again, because I think we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle at the back, unless we get kind of major reinforcements in there. But obviously players are going to come back. Kelly Evans will eventually come back, although I think he's going to be out for quite a while. It kind of looked like a muscular injury, so that's not a good one. Dan Moss is obviously going to come back as well. So there's players to come back. You don't want to sign so many players that again, you end up with an inflated squad when people do come back. So I think it's only going to get better from this point of view. And things happen so quickly at this level, where we're talking on a Wednesday, we could have a couple of new players in by the weekend. But even if we don't, obviously we have the one league game against Hartlepool, the trophy the week later. Not downplaying the trophy, I know a lot of people are really excited about that, and talking about if we win this and get to the next round, and how many steps to Wembley, all of this kind of stuff. But obviously that's a lesser competition. Staying in the National League is the big thing, the big part of the project. There's no point kind of Todd Johnson coming in with all his expertise and funding and all these things if we're in the Conference South next season. It's that kind of really sets us back. So whereas if we got the trophy, bit of a shame, but not the end of the world. But we get another week there where we're there's no midweek game, and then we can kind of focus on signing players, hopefully, and getting a more settled team that can go up there and perform. As I say, after that you've got York and then Dagenham, both away, so some really tricky games to come. But I think, as we've seen against some of the other sides, we can certainly mix it up, but we're going to have to certainly be on our game up front, and maybe play a slightly different style of football. But a game against Ebbsfleet at home, where we're heavily expected to win, is tricky as well. So sometimes it's nice having the games where the pressure is on someone like Hartlepool, who kind of, as we talked about in our interview with Robbie, the pressure's always on them, no matter where they are in the table. People are going to be expecting that they just turn up and win home games. That's kind of the mentality of clubs like that. So gives us a different edge for those away games coming up. But I think that's everything for now. We will have another pod within the next couple of weeks, probably looking back at the Hartlepool result, the trophy, and maybe where we go from there, and who we get in the next round, if we get through, and if not, kind of what we can expect for the rest of the season, and any more ins and outs. I'm sure it's going to be a busy time around the club. So thank you for listening. Let us know any thoughts online, and as always, if you have any questions, we will read them out in the next pod. But that is all for now. Thank you for listening.